Okay, this meeting is back in order. There's no one you want to be stuck with rather than city government, police, and fire. What an event.
No action was taken.
Okay, Mr. City Manager.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. Tonight, we have a discussion item related to the Dynamic Core Redevelopment TIF District. We have a presentation tonight. First, I'll introduce Deputy City Manager Doug Gerber for a couple of comments before the presentation.
Deputy Mayor, Mr. Manager, thank you. I really don't have much in the way of comments except to say that we have been having discussions about trying to proactively establish TIF districts across the community to help us with our development and redevelopment efforts. And as we've been talking about this with some of you, as we've had a chance to meet with you, and I know as the Chamber folks have had a chance to meet with you, there's been general support expressed for this. And so we wanted to, as you know, as part of our economic development process, we have instituted a step where before we actually ask you to take formal action on anything, we have the quote-unquote developer come to you and give you an overview of what the project might entail or what is envisioned by the project. And so that's really what we're looking for tonight, is for Curtis and Vince and maybe some others to give you an idea of what might be entailed with the establishment of this district, and then to answer any questions that you might have so that we can go into setting the public hearing and beginning our process with everyone working from the same sheet of music. So at this point, I would ask, I think Vince is going to lead off. All right, so Vince Fry will come forward.
Thank you. Deputy Mayor, Council, that was exciting, wasn't it? I went someplace I'd never been before, so it was kind of educational too. We're here tonight to talk to you about an opportunity that we think is very significant to the continued growth of our community. Wanted to give you maybe a background of how this all came about. Many of you remember back to 2008 during the visioning process, where hundreds if not thousands of citizens gathered and gave their input as to their priorities for the future of our community. Topping that list was a revitalized downtown. Also wanted to have an arts district, which has become NOTO, very successful. And the development of the river. And we've had great conversations about all of these areas over the years. Several years ago, through Heartland Visioning, I think the term dynamic core was created. And it encompassed downtown, the river, and NOTO. Mayor Walgast, at the time, chaired that committee for Heartland Visioning until he decided as mayor he had a lot of things he needed to attend to, and he asked me to take over, and I have been the chair of that for the last 2 years. Also, during this period of time, the Topeka and Shawnee County Riverfront Authority has been very active trying to develop the river and activate it. I served as recording secretary of that organization for 5 years and took part in a lot of those discussions. And most recently, through Momentum 2022, the Downtown, NOTO, and Riverfront Work Group has been very engaged in coming up with ideas and suggestions to improve this area. So lots of great ideas over these years, great discussion, but everything keeps coming back to how can we fund it? And that is one of the reasons that we're here tonight. In October, we commissioned a market study for this dynamic core. Some of you were involved in the interviews. Some of you were involved in hearing the results of those. To give you a few facts and figures from that study, we found that currently there are 23,000 jobs in the dynamic core. There's currently about 850,000 square feet of retail and approximately 375 hotel beds. Downtown contains 60% of the region's office space, and this is an interesting stat from my standpoint. Downtown contains 24% of the city's jobs in less than 2% of the land area. So a lot of people working in a very small area of the community. The market study that we commissioned came up with many results. I wanted to share some of the things that they determined that this area could support over the next 10 years. They feel that we could add another 900 housing units, and definitely with the demand that we're seeing in downtown for housing, I definitely believe we can do that easily. They believe there's another 690,000 square feet of supportable retail space that can be developed. Another 300,000 square feet of new and rehabbed office, and another potential 250 hotel rooms. So as you can see, the opportunities exist, and this market study only has defined the fact that this dynamic core truly can be dynamic. That's why we come before you tonight to suggest that the means of doing that is a TIF district, and Curtis Sneeden is going to share some reasons why we think this is truly important.
Thank you, Vince. So Curtis Sneeden with the Greater Topeka Partnership. It's a pleasure to chat with you all this evening. And I would note that it's a pleasure and an honor to work with Vince Fry. I'm not aware of too many people who are better ambassadors for the downtown of our capital city, and this is a terrific project to be collaborating with Vince on. He just gave you some insights into the type of potential that we think is possible for our downtown. I thought I'd go into a little more detail on what we're asking you to do to help this community tap into that potential. If we want to see these sorts of activities in our downtown and in NOTO, in our dynamic core, then we think it's important that we set the table correctly for developers and property owners and investors so that they will step forward and take a risk on this part of our city. So we're asking you to establish this dynamic core as a tax increment financing district. Now, you've all gotten quite a bit of briefing on this topic over the last couple of months because you've had projects come before you. I won't dwell on the details too much, but I found that it's helpful almost every time I have a conversation about this to parse out some of the basics just to make sure our understanding is common. We know that tax increment financing is not about handing out money to developers. Sometimes it's portrayed that way in social media and other places. It's not even about existing tax dollars. It's about value that's brought to the property by developers who improve the parcels that they own, and then as the value goes up, they're eligible for reimbursement of some of their costs from the incremental increase in their property value. So we're not talking about a grant program. We're talking about a fairly common type of economic development tool. It is true that we've seen activity in downtown. We're very proud of some of the momentum that's developed. I think we've all spent some time in that lobby area that's shown in the picture there on the right at the Cyrus and some of the other restaurants that have opened up. And that is terrific, but it would be, in our opinion, a big mistake to think that this game is over. It's not even close to being won yet. There is momentum, but the flywheel is not turning on its own yet, and we believe that it's important to put forward the TIF district in order to ensure that we continue down the right path. I would remind you, as you probably don't need reminding, but it might be helpful for some of my friends and your constituents to remember that the city adopted a revised TIF policy a year and a half ago or so, and one of the key components of that policy is that pay-as-you-go portion of the policy. So it's important to keep in mind that when the day comes that that development project agreements are brought before you for your consideration, it won't be a matter of the city taking on risk for projects in downtown or NOTO. The developer doesn't get a dime until they've invested their money, improved the property, and caused the value to go up. So that's the way it works now under the new city's policy, and we think that that's a good process that ensures that the developers have an opportunity to do good, beneficial things, and the community comes out ahead too, because we end up with revitalized properties in an area where otherwise we're not seeing the type of movement we'd like to. And then also, just for the benefit of, frankly, again, my friends, we do know that TIF is distinct from star bonds and community improvement districts. It's very easy to get those topics kind of muddled together. Tonight, we're talking about a TIF district in downtown, and those are other topics. Those are good tools as well, but tonight we're talking about TIF. So let me just touch briefly on what we mean by the dynamic core, the boundaries of this district. It starts on 17th Street on the south. It runs up through downtown, across the river, through Noto, and then ends in the area of Soldier Creek on the north side of Noto. We are proud that it incorporates what we call the Crossroads of Freedom, including the Brown v. Board National Historic Site, the post office downtown, Constitution Hall, Pappin's Landing, a number of those heritage features that our community is so proud of. And someday when we go to market this thing, I think that will help us tell a coherent narrative about this part of our community. I do want to be clear that the boundaries of this map, and you don't have the slide up, is that?
Move the slide.
What do I need to do? I told you I don't do technology. Well, you have it in your packet.
Hold on.
Okay, that. Okay. You need, I want you to be clear in your minds that Vince and I didn't just sit in a room and draw this out. It was the result of a fair amount of interaction with affected stakeholders, and most importantly on the north side, we spent some time with leadership up in Noto. And they helped us understand how that community knits together and why the boundary line you see there makes more sense from their point of view. It's also true that this district fits right inside the boundaries of an enterprise zone that was created in the early 90s. For statutory reasons, that's very helpful. It makes it relatively straightforward to establish this area as a TIF district, and so that's part of the reason this thing looks the way it does as well. So you also will see in your packet that there's a reference to opportunity zones, and I won't delve too deeply into those, but it's an exciting added feature of this part of town, and that is, you know, last year, Governor Collier designated 3 census tracts as federal opportunity zones. One of those tracts is downtown, and 2 of them are in Noto. It's basically the same area we're talking about. Those opportunity zones are a way to attract capital. It's complicated, but basically if you invest in real estate or a business in one of those opportunity zones and you stick around for 7 to 10 years, you stand to save quite a bit on your federal income taxes. So that's a great tool that is the result of something Congress did. It coincides with the area we're talking about, and so a developer very well could take advantage of that, as well as negotiating a TIF agreement with the city. So I do want to be clear that what we're asking you now isn't about giving away anything in particular at this moment, especially not your negotiating leverage. We're asking you to establish this area so that it's understood to the community of developers and the community at large that this is an area the city has agreed is ripe for development and ought to be a place where TIF discussions happen. The developers still need to come forward and engage with city staff. They still need to have some hard-headed negotiations, and they still need to present deals to you that are a fair deal for the taxpayers of our community. So if you vote for this at the end of the process that we're in right now, there's still more to come in terms of dealing with specific projects that will be brought before you. What we're asking you to do at this point is set the table. And finally, I've been asked by a number of you and also others that I run into, why would we not pay attention to other parts of town that need attention as well? And I think there are 2 kinds of answers to that. The first would be that, as far as I know, I can't speak for any of you certainly, but my guess would be that if a developer came before you with a project in, say, East Topeka, and they wanted to do TIF financing or some other type of incentive, my guess would be, assuming it made sense and was eligible, you would probably move fairly aggressively to try to put that in place. There would be great eagerness to go ahead and have this sort of activity in other parts of town. So it's not a matter of excluding other parts of town. If somebody stepped forward, I'm sure you would jump on that. But the more important point from our vantage point is that once this district is put in place, we would be really quite excited about pivoting and engaging with local leaders in other parts of town to use what we're doing now as kind of a template to see if we couldn't explore this sort of opportunity in other areas of town where we think it could do some good as well. So there's nothing exclusive about what we're asking you to do tonight or as part of this process. We're starting with the core. It's a way to keep momentum going, but if it's a good thing for downtown, it ought to be a good thing for other parts of the city too. So this could be quite a conversation that continues to the benefit of the entire city. So I think those were the points I wanted to make for you. And if there are any questions, Vince would be happy to answer them for you.
Councilmember Cohen.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. It's Overland Park or something like that does vast miles of TIF districts. Why is ours, small? Why don't we go all the way south to like 470 interchange or something like that? Why don't we go that far?
I would say that philosophically, you won't get any pushback from me or my organization to that question. There are one of the reasons this district isn't that broad is kind of technical, and it has to do with that enterprise zone that I mentioned. According to the current state statute, if you put a TIF district inside the boundaries of an old enterprise zone, you sort of get to start the game 2 or 3 squares down the board. So we took advantage of that statute. It saves us the trouble of doing various types of studies. And you can just say, look, this is, the state statute says, here's a place to start. Now, as I noted, I referenced East Topeka, but it's quite conceivable that another type of district would make sense going south on the boulevard. I mean, if it's a good tool for now, let's keep playing it. Someday, this market might be so vibrant that we don't need to be talking about incentivizing development, but we're not there yet.
Okay, before we go have any further discussion, we have 2 people signed up to speak, so we might be calling you back up, Curtis. Okay, so the first person to speak, Mike Morse.
Good evening. I can't believe Curtis let me stand up here without giving me talking points. So, if you actually vote yes, I'll sit down, I won't talk. Is that fair? You all know me. There it is.
Discussion only, you gotta keep talking for a long time.
So, I'm current chair of Downtown Topeka, Inc. I'm the vice chair of Downtown Topeka Foundation. I've been a little invested in downtown for a while. We've won, thank you. Thanks for what you've done. Thanks for what we're going to do going forward. It is just a pleasure to be downtown. It's a pleasure to see Noto. It's a pleasure to have family and friends in town and take them to our core. So it's a ton of fun. Thank you. And it really comes down to I appreciate what you're doing. I appreciate your time. I appreciate positive. The GTP has been great. We're working together. We're talking about things we haven't talked about before. We're making a difference. You're making a difference. This is just great. So I appreciate what we're doing. As Curtis says, there's not a lot of, there's something we can do. It's not difficult to do. It's something we should do. We're not ruffling anybody's feathers. We're going to have a lot tougher votes in the future about different stuff. But thank you, because we're going to make it. I walked down the avenue today, the parking was full. I'm meeting with Brenda, and we're talking about parking issues in downtown. How cool is that? I mean, let's be honest, how cool is that? That was not an issue 3 years ago. Let's talk about cool stuff. So I really appreciate what you're doing. We have more fun stuff to come. This is one of those things that's kind of a no-brainer for me because it really is that easy, but I appreciate your time and what you're doing, so thank you.
Thank you, Mike. Next person signed up, Mark Rezek. Okay, now we can discussion or questions. Councilmember Jensen.
Thank you. I guess I'll address this to the city management team. Can you guys talk about how, a TIF district diverts revenue above a certain, initial threshold? How does that work in a district where there aren't particular projects yet? And are we diverting revenue from the entire district? I know we had talked about this briefly earlier today, but it's important for the public to understand, especially as we talk about, the need to grow city revenue, how this is an investment and how all that's going to play out.
Well, I'll give you a short answer, and that is that as we move forward, Councilmember, we establish a base for this particular area. And when that base is established, that becomes the floor, more or less, for what might come in the future. And so then as we begin to have negotiations with individuals that are looking at investing in our community, that would then become where we start from, and then where they move to will become the increment for this particular area.
So until an actual project is brought forward, we're not actually diverting any city revenue to anything at all?
Well, we are, and I'll let Doug cover. We have information, we know how this works, and I'll let Doug cover. This has information.
Councilman Jensen, the short answer to your question is, if the body moves forward with this, with the establishment of the district, then, as the city manager said, that sets the base from which the increment is captured.
Sure.
Once the district is established, we begin to capture that increment. And that money does get peeled off. So from day one, that increment begins to get captured. So anytime you establish a TIF, it's a balancing act really between establishing a district so that the base is, say, low enough so that there's going to be a good increment when development comes, versus not doing it too soon so that you begin capturing increment sooner than you need to. So I guess that's a longer answer than I anticipated. But the other thing I would say is many cities, many of our peer cities, and I know 20 years ago when I started my career in Michigan, one of the ways they handled this was they would use that initial capture to do parking. That was a big reason why they wanted to get districts going, particularly in their downtown area, was they used that initial capture to do parking type projects. The other thing you can use that initial capture for as you bank it is you can use it to incentivize early adapters. If someone comes in early, you can say you could negotiate a bonus. I mean, I could go on and on. There's many ways you could use that, but you do indeed begin capturing that immediately.
So,
Anybody,
sorry, I'd follow up.
you have a follow-up? Okay, go ahead.
So if we start capturing that immediately, then what happens if no projects ever come forward? What do we do with all this money that we've been banked from this district?
So once you establish, Councilman Jensen, once you establish a district, the governing body has the ability to keep that district going for as long as you like. Now, you may be confused thinking, well, Mr. Gerber, you told us just a couple months ago that a TIF is for 20 years. I did say that, and that's accurate. That's a TIF project. The district itself, they're typically synonymous with the project, but they don't have to be. The district can go on ad infinitum. But what happens if this district is established, we capture the revenue, and nothing happens? Then we would bring this to the body and say this district needs to be dissolved, and we would send the funds back to the respective taxing agencies on a prorated basis. And in fact, that just happened with this very body a couple of years ago with the 15th and Adams TIF district. It's been since I've been here, so in the last 5 years, it was a district with no activity. We asked you to dissolve it, and those funds went back to the taxing entities.
So I guess
Any
if I
other
could-
questions? We'll come back to you. Councilmember Jeff Cohen.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. I had one more question about, now, we have a TIF district downtown already. It's around the Cyrus Hotel. How does this affect that at all, if anything?
Councilman Cohen, we don't have any TIF districts currently in the downtown.
Oh, it's a CID.
We have a CID
Gotcha.
around the Cyrus Hotel, yeah.
No more questions. Thank you.
Anybody else? Councilmember Emerson.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. So, Mr. Gerber, as I understand it, so we put this in effect, and whenever it goes into effect, just say, I know that's obviously a lot of property, so I don't know, it's $50 million worth of property, maybe $100 million worth of property? The last few years, properties went up almost 3%, it seems like, and especially on commercial properties, right? So I guess that kind of worries me. are we restricted on what we can do with that money? I mean, does it go to the general fund?
Councilman Emerson, we are restricted with what that money can be used for. It's spelled out pretty clearly statutorily as well as, within our policies. What happens when we capture that is it goes into its own segregated fund, and that fund is a standalone fund in our accounting system.
And if I may ask a follow-up? And is there no other way to do it? I mean, if it's possible, in my mind, the perfect scenario would be the valuation of the district floats until each property within the district floats, until such time there's a project, a specific project plan that's been developed. Because, I'm thinking somebody fixes up their house in this district, and under this, it no longer goes to the general fund, and now goes into the special fund. I mean, anything anybody does to improve their property the city no longer get the benefit of it. And as you know, this year, we're talking about, the need for shortfalls. I mean, we got police we're trying to take care of, fire we're trying to take care of, and all these things. I guess it troubles me. And do we know what the impact could be financially of this?
Councilman Emerson, no, we don't have a dollar value impact, which I think is what you're asking for. Again, I would go back to my previous comments. We're trying to strike the balance between making sure the base value is appropriate and has room in it for growth, because if you wait until too much development happens, then obviously there's not going to be much increment to capture, or at least the kind of increment that you want, again, versus doing it too soon and capturing revenue unnecessarily. And I guess I would just further state, and this is probably just a personal bias, but I'll throw it out there, that because I told you this the other day when we met, what we've been doing in terms of economic development efforts hasn't paid the dividends that we'd like to see it. And so in my mind, it's worth trying something different. And I think this is an appropriate approach for us to try.
Mr. City Manager?
The other thing I'll add, Councilman Emerson, is that we will see a benefit. I mean, the money will be available to us. We have an untold number of projects that we could do in the downtown area. Fixing a street, fixing a sidewalk, some of those types of things that are available to us. And so this money would allow us to have the ability to gain a benefit for that area that we're trying to make sure that we're keeping in a positive looking area so that we can take advantage of that in that form. Now, you're right, we would lose that from the general fund, but it would also end up helping us when it comes to infrastructure projects and other things that might be related to the effort that would be necessary for a particular project. And so that can be an important step as we have negotiations with a particular developer.
Thank you.
Mr. Padilla, Councilmember Padilla.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. My question isn't on those lines. When I hear the talk of the opportunities that could come to us by establishing this district for developers, to my mind, I immediately think of the large developers that we have been fortunate to have in Topeka and those big developments. Would you clarify for me, does this make it possible for the small business entrepreneurs, does that help them in any way, or does it tie up the property so that it's going to be exclusively used by just the large developers?
Well, we could tag team on that if you want, Mr. Gerber, but what I would say is that under the TIF program, there aren't any thresholds that make this the exclusive realm of large developers. I think that there's a certain minimum kind of magnitude of project where it makes more sense than not. So, that's a consideration, but certainly anyone could come along with the right project idea, and if they're able to get financing and negotiate a deal with the city, then we'd love to see it happen. It's not just about the handful of big developers. Anything else?
No, I think Curtis nailed it, and we actually talked about this this morning anticipating this question might come. And I would reemphasize that there's certainly no prohibition, but fundamentally TIFs are designed with larger projects in mind than a typical small business might undertake.
If I could do a follow-up. There is an application fee? And what is that fee?
Councilman Padilla, per policy, our application fee is $5,000. And then we also ask applicants to submit essentially a retainer to us of, I should know, I think it's $25,000 or $30,000 to allow for the various analyses that need to take place. So, again, for a smaller project, that's probably not going to give the cost benefit that folks might want.
Okay, thank you.
Councilmember Mays?
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. I guess this question would be for Doug. There's a lot of government-owned buildings in this district, starting with the Capitol building, this building that we're in right now. How would they be affected in any way? And would it incentivize some of these government entities to perhaps sell those buildings off and privatize at some point?
Councilman Mays, I don't know that it would impact them because, again, the fundamental purpose of a TIF is to capture the property tax, and those buildings don't generate property tax, including this building.
Right.
So I guess in theory, if the market got hot enough, there may be some momentum for folks to want to move their buildings, which is what we'd want, of course.
Thank you.
Councilmember Jensen?
Thanks. So to go all the way back to the beginning and to finish my line of questioning, so when we talk about, because the concern that I'm hearing from people is that we're going to divert revenue from the city into a fund that then is going to sit there in perpetuity, but then my understanding from you city managers that can be used for specific projects. So my question is, at what point will we do that? It is at the discretion of the council. A great example would be we need to redo the parking garages, the parking management system. Is that something that this could be used for, and would we need a specific project brought by a developer in order to do that? Essentially what I'm trying to avoid is we have all this revenue sitting in an account that we can't use unless we dissolve the district, even though, we have a need now and there's no pending project. It's say in 5 or 10 years, we have a need at that point and there's no pending project within the district. We're gonna have a pile of cash sitting here that isn't doing anything.
Councilman Jensen, I think it's certainly within this body's discretion ultimately, but I think it would behoove us to have that kind of conversation with our GTP partners and staff. In the conversations I've had with them, parking comes up frequently as not only an allowable use, but also an appropriate use. As you know, we're having conversations about parking and struggling to figure out how to best serve the parking needs downtown. And so those funds could be used for a parking type project. That being said, I don't think we'd want to do some sort of, cash grab.
Right, of course
just
not.
Use this as a way to generate funds for our own projects exclusively.
So to oversimplify it, we're basically going to set aside some cash for the specific purpose of incentivizing development within this area, but if that doesn't come, then we can deploy it on specific things as outlined by state law to improve the district.
Good. And again, the funds, going back to the beginning, the funds are the difference between the base
Right.
increment and whatever the value and growth is over years that pass. And so to suggest that there's going to be an entire huge pot of money sitting there in year one is...
No, I would agree, though. My property taxes downtown have tripled in the last 2 years, so I expect there'll be a substantial amount of money fairly rapidly in this account, just based on the history I've seen of this area.
Okay, let's move on. Councilmember Lesser?
2 quick questions. Fundamentally, though, there also could be a point where we could say at this point, let's just say we've reached a peak at this point for what we have done. And theoretically, there could be no money that goes in that if it were to stay level. Correct. My next question is, do we have the ability to establish the district, but not, I know I'm splitting hairs here, but what I'm trying to get at is establish the district, however, not establish it until the first significant development within that, within the TIF district comes to us that's approved?
Councilman Lesser, short answer, yes. I mean, we had anticipated sticking this on the June 4th agenda for action by the body to establish the district. Certainly doesn't have to happen then. Again, I'll repeat myself, but it comes down to timing things correctly. Making sure that we have the right base, but also get a district established in an appropriate amount of time, because it does take a little bit of time.
Sure.
To get that going. And as you know, when developers come to us, it's generally hurry up.
Sure.
Hurry up, so.
Sure. Thank you.
Councilmember Hiller?
Thank you. I did not realize that the increment would be collected on a strategy like this right away. I guess I have to think about it, but I'm troubled in a way in that, I mean, we already invested $8 million, more or less, in downtown Topeka. And we bonded it all the streetscape and the utilities underneath, with the idea that when property values went up, that would help pay off the bonds. If now a number of the new developments have neighborhood revitalization program, and they're getting rebates on their property taxes anyway, but everybody else's the increases are helping to pay, helping with our operating budget and help to pay off that $8 million debt. So to kind of mortgage it again, or to save it up and spend it on other things. I didn't realize that. I came into tonight with a question about using such a development to incentivize, kind of back to what Curtis started with, and wondering, well, I'd asked Doug and Brent about the base, kind of on the lines of what somebody else said, you know, can't we adjust the base when the project starts so we don't give away whatever increment has already been earned up until that time? And I got told no. So trying to get that figured out tonight, it would seem that if you could adjust the base, if you create the district, but you can set the base when the projects actually come online, at least we could collect some of the money. The other thing I wondered, to set something like this, it's going to collect that increment forever, doesn't seem maybe the best. And wondered if we wanted to set, if we did it, if we wanted to set a time frame on it, like 10 years or 15 or 20, so that it would sunset, so that some subsequent council wouldn't have to decide to end it. We could set a sunset, and then somebody could decide to extend it, but at least there would be a sunset in it. And that further, if that sunset were there, would that in fact help incentivize the very developers that you all are envisioning wanting to step to the plate soon and get started? If it's not going to last, if it's going to last forever, maybe I'm a prospective developer and I just kind of take my time, you know, keep an eye on that building, whatever. Would it be helpful? And it didn't come up when I was getting my preliminary briefing, so I don't, if we could ask, has anybody talked about sunsetting the district?
Councilwoman Hiller, that hasn't been part of our discussion. It's an interesting thought. I think we're all maybe in kind of a fluid mode at this moment. So yeah, no, that hasn't been part of our discussions. It's worth thinking that through as far as, the timing is important. I don't know what sort of sunset we'd be thinking of there.
Well, again, I'm thinking about that, how that increment, if I may, would go up, and wanting to capture some of that to put back into the general fund. I mean, I understand incentivizing, but to just lock away when the development hasn't even happened and we need that, just how you would manage that, and again, setting that district and leaving it open indefinitely, you never get the money.
So maybe is that something you would look at, consider?
Yeah, I think there's more discussion to be had here. I do want to chase off the creeping sense here that we are talking about this indefinite period of time before there's activity. I think that the sorts of activities that we're talking about and that were alluded to in that market study are considerably more imminent than we might be giving ourselves credit for here. But your concerns are duly noted. That makes sense to try to work that through.
And I have a question about the study. This is just a real easy question. So you talked about the housing and the retail. Now, that we have the room for, is that what's there currently, or is that could be developed, or is it both?
It could be developed and supported over the next 10 years, is what the study said.
So we don't have that now?
No, we do not.
We could.
The potential is
Okay.
there for it, yes.
Okay.
And that's why we feel this is so important to have it in place, so when developers come along wanting to take advantage of this opportunity, it's sitting there for them.
All right. Okay. Councilmember Emerson.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. Mr. Gerber, sorry, I'm not trying to beat a dead horse here, but like Councilwoman Hiller, and I apologize to Mr. Sneeden, we met a couple different times to go through this, but like Councilwoman Hiller, I did not realize that the day you start this district, it caps and it starts collecting the increment right then. And maybe this is something you need to send me in an email or something, because it might be too detailed an explanation to give here. However, what I don't quite understand is, so you got the whole district that you're capping at this valuation right now, but then inside of it, in a year from now, there's a project that starts. I guess I understand then how individual properties become taxed at different rates at different times and gets captured differently. Is it the entire district by itself that gets increment, or once there's a project, does that then become funds that just go toward to paying that off? And and I also wonder the opposite. Maybe a value of property has declined. Do you pay less in the future? And does that come out of the TIF district? Or are you locked in at your base forever, even if you demolish your building?
Can you answer that in 20 minutes or less?
20 seconds.
There's, Councilman Emerson, there's a lot to unpackage there, but
Sure.
I'll give it a shot. I guess fundamentally, I would say that the TIF has nothing to do with how you pay taxes. It's if you own property in this, once this district is established, you will continue to pay taxes as if it were today and there's not a district. So if the value in your property increases, you'll pay more taxes. If it decreases, you'll pay less, with or without a TIF. So I think maybe that's creating some of the confusion, is that the establishment of a district doesn't have anything to do with the mechanics by which you pay your property taxes. The second thing is, yes, the entire district is captured. Then a developer, GTP, whomever, brings this body a plan, and the plan likely encompasses a smaller area than the entire district, right? I think that's what everyone envisions. The increment for that smaller area is what's used for that particular TIF project plan. So again, you have to make the distinction between the TIF district and the TIF project plan, which our policy does. I mean, they're two separate processes, usually related, but they are separate and distinct. And so that the increment from that smaller district area is captured. Now, all the other increment that's been previously captured, again, the body, staff can negotiate creatively or how best to use that additional increment. It could be used to incentivize the first comer to get a project going. Can be used for public infrastructure projects, et cetera. Is that?
Yes, thank you.
So, go ahead.
Just to respond to Councilwoman Hiller's question, she emailed the city manager and and in fact, I did say no, because the statute tells me I need to say no. The statute doesn't allow us to change what the base is. You can't willy-nilly change the base. Once you establish a district, the statute requires that the district remains. Now, what cities do to be creative with that is, in the intervening years, like say 5 years out, maybe they, typically we negotiate that a developer can capture 100% of the increment. But what some cities do is they negotiate so that a developer in say 5 years only captures 40%. And then the other, the city realizes the benefit, and other taxing entities realize the benefit from that 60% capture.
So I'd suggest, and staff is really good about doing this after a meeting, sending out emails that kind of answer, questions that we have. So I would suggest that we wait for that and pick up the discussion next week with those questions. Did you have a?
Yeah. Thank you, Deputy Mayor. Just to kind of piggyback on Councilwoman Hiller's idea of setting a sunset. If a project is started initially, and let's say we have that TIF sunset in 5 or 10 years, will they be able to continue on with the plan as they initially set that? And then also, I guess, a second question would be if so, would we be able to, as a governing body, renew the TIF with a new base at the end of that? So, will we be back having this discussion again in 5 or 10 years and reset the base on any projects that haven't already started?
But since we don't have a sunset,
But if we were to put one on, if we were to put one on there,
Right.
this, hypothetically speaking.
Councilman Mays, I'm thinking through your example, and I think I would like to say I will get back to you, so I don't give you the wrong answer. You have some hard questions tonight, but I will say I think that there's a reason that the statutes allow for a 20-year period, and that is so that projects are appropriately incentivized over that time. And so to think of doing something less than 20 years would be non-traditional, for sure.
Thank you.
Councilmember Jensen.
So here's my parting thought and a scenario to throw at you guys. I'm particularly excited about how we expect this whole area to grow within this proposed district. I'm excited about the concept of diverting some of the tax revenue from the improvements now, because if the area grows and becomes as popular as we all hope it is, it will need disproportionately more maintenance on its public infrastructure to handle the influx of people and the growth. And so this, to some degree, gives us a mechanism to fund that, in addition to incentivizing continued growth and development, for public infrastructure and that sort of thing. So correct me if I'm wrong, but this would give us an additional fund that we could use within this district to do maintenance and repairs on public infrastructure if needed, or improvements, in order to better facilitate the growth of the district, in addition to incentivizing developers where appropriate. Is that not correct?
Councilman Jensen, that's correct. I think we would want to focus on the word improvements.
Agreed.
Rather than maintenance.
Well, but if we need to go from a 5-foot or 4-foot sidewalk to a 10-foot sidewalk to accommodate that many pedestrians, then
I'm just thinking through statutorily, we'd want to be able to meet how it's spelled out.
Agreed.
Within the statute.
Okay, let's pick this up next time. So let's proceed to the next non-action item that the clerk would read.
B is discussion regarding changes in snow operations and providing a summary of winter operations from November 2018 through March 2019.
Mr. City Manager.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. Tonight, our Public Works Director, Jason Peak, will go through a report related to winter operations. Even though we just had a tornado activity, we're trying to talk about winter operations tonight. Jason?
Yes, good evening, governing body. Thank you for having me here tonight. We scheduled this presentation to make sure we were out of winter weather. I understand Colorado actually got snow earlier this week, so good for us that we didn't. But I just want to give you a summary of activity related to winter operations this past snow season. And what we would call this past snow season would be from November of 2018 through March of 2019. Just as kind of a reminder, because I'm going to talk about how we changed our process during the course of operations this year, and so just want to use this. A number of you have seen this map before, but our prior operational practice, and as we entered 2018, is driven on route type and accumulation totals. This map shows our different route types, with red being our emergency routes, green are our primary routes, and blue our secondary routes. And our past practice has been to focus first on those primary and emergency routes, and then depending on accumulation totals, move into the secondary routes, and then if we had accumulations greater than 6 inches, we would move into all the local streets. Just as a point of reference, the emergency primary and secondary routes represent about 50% of our pavement within the city. So when we talk about lane miles, that's about 50% of the inventory, and of course the balance is made up within local streets. The other thing I'd say about this is this does cover a lot of streets, and one of our staff person did kind of analysis, and most of the local streets are within 4 blocks of one of these routes. You've seen this graphic before, and I've updated it with the snow events we had this past season. So what this is, each dot represents basically a snow event that we've had in the city since 2010. And the vertical our vertical axis basically represents how much accumulation total we had. So kind of down at the bottom, 0, moving all the way up to 14 inches of accumulation. We had an event in the past of 12 inches accumulation. I'm glad I was not here for that. That's a lot of snow for a southern guy to see, and hope I don't see that in the future. The Y, or the x-axis across the bottom, basically represents a summary of our cost per event. So this is capturing basically our labor, equipment, and material or contract cost. The blue dots represent all the events that happened in the past. The yellow represents events that happened this snow season. And the red dot I'm going to talk a little bit about. That was when we actually went in and did plowing in the residential areas. So key takeaways from this: our prior practice, we did not do local streets unless we had 6 inches of accumulation or greater. So you can see on this chart, that's why in the past we have not done local streets. That was kind of our practice. We don't have a lot of snow events that exceed the majority or less than 4 inches. And then kind of moving along to this year, we included this. We had a total of 10 snow events over this snow season, and what this is just basically a bar chart representing our cost for each event. The blue bar basically represents our labor and equipment costs. So you could think of that as, we budget our labor and salary cost in the operating budget. We capture our equipment costs. That's basically the value of the use of equipment, and that's what's put in that blue column. And then the orange represents basically the cost we have associated with buying material, our de-icer, our sand, our urea, and also cost to pay a contractor that's either assisting with hauling or plowing. A couple things I want to point out on this chart as well. We spent, in total about $959,000 in cost on this past snow season, and about 550,000 of that was associated with the material and contract services. As we said in the memo to you, we did change our practice this year, based on kind of feedback we received from the governing body and the public. At the end of the January, in consultation with the city manager, we made the decision to plow local streets. We'd only had 3 inches of accumulation. And that decision was made after we'd kind of worked through the priority and emergency routes. So we actually had a nice data point in the sense that on January 25th, all our efforts were focused on local streets. And so highlight that, the total cost was about $64,000 to do all our local streets. Average cost is all the way over on the right. So if you just look at what our average event cost was, around $95,000 per event in operations. And what I would say is we did not have a wholesale push into the residential streets after that 25th event. We didn't do a large-scale plowing effort. I would say a lot of credit goes to Jackie Vogel and Tony Trower and their team in kind of adapting and being more responsive in how we managed snow operations. So our approach now, as you saw in the memo, is what I call is event-specific and looking at extended forecast to kind of determine what streets we actually do. We're always going to continue to focus on emergency and priority first, but we'll, in consultation with the city manager, say, hey, we're going to have extended freezing temperatures based on this accumulation. We think we need to go into residential areas. But we are going into residential areas as part of that first push to hit what we call hotspot areas. So hills, intersections, those things that are within those residential areas that are problems for school buses and traffic. That's part of our core practice, and we'll do that at the outset. But I just want to make it clear that we haven't changed to where we're doing residentials all the time. And just kind of want to summarize kind of where we are. So we're going to continue this event-specific approach for 2019-2020. Reemphasize that residential wholesale plowing and treating of those streets will be dependent on how much accumulation we see and what that extended forecast with. Mother Nature is our friend. If we have warming temperatures and the sun comes out, it does a lot of work to get to those areas. We did take advantage of, we had an existing contract for snow removal services, and that's a 3-year contract basically for someone to provide plowing services, hauling of snow. We have to haul snow out of the downtown areas as we kind of get it into windrows to get it out, just not a lot of room to work. So we plan to continue using those contract services to supplement our forces. And then just looking at kind of the history of what we have, what I'd call our direct expense, that materials and contract services that we spend, we will be requesting $800,000 in the 2020 budget proposal to pay for the cost of de-icer and those contract services. And just, to remind the governing body, we heard loud and clear from you that, as we move forward with the sales tax renewal, that you didn't want those snow removal costs coming out of the sales tax program. So that's a request we put in to the general fund. And with that, I'd stand for any questions that you have.
Questions, discussion from the council? Councilmember Hill.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. I pulled and brought with me the chart that you had attached that had those expenses in it. And was your purpose in doing that chart just to kind of show the direct expenses that were on the occasions that we had the snow?
Yeah, so that cost information is aggregated into that bar chart, and it gives more detail than what's provided on that summary chart.
Just the reason I ask is we have typically underrepresented our true cost, and I see that you have labor and you've added benefits in there, but I didn't know whose labor. Is it just the frontline people in the trucks?
So this is basically our labor cost associated with the work order. So I guess there's not a true management overhead. I mean, the supervisory staff that may be working in the office aren't fully captured. The department director and those other things that are part of that are not. But it's basically in line with our FEMA reimbursable rates is how our work orders are set up.
Thank you. The FEMA rates have always troubled me, and I understand why we, if that's all they'll let us record, just for what it's worth. I mean, for instance, I'll just pitch this because it's been a while. When people generally work only about 1,700 to 1,800 of the 2,040 hours a year, that's a full-time position. With vacation, sick leave, training, just real simple holidays. So to figure out what they are worth per hour, you have to adjust that even for what the net cost is per hour for somebody. And then if this doesn't include management and it doesn't include in the fall purchasing all this equipment, getting it out, getting it tuned up, getting it tested, all those kinds of things, it probably easily twice the true cost to the city to do this program. And depends on how or why we're using the numbers, but I hope that, I just wanted to point that out, because this is very much just an hourly then of clocking in and clocking out that day, right? Yes. Okay. Thank you. Still big numbers, and I appreciate the record, so it wasn't that. I just know it cost us more than that.
Councilmember Cohen?
Thank you.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. Dr. Peak, how do I get a street added to the blue list on your diagram? It's not my street, but Sherwood Park is all the way at the edge of the city limits, and they just claim the city doesn't think about them, they forget about them, and there is a route that they could just go in and then come out, and it would get swooped through most of the majority of that neighborhood. I was wanting to know how we could get them on the list.
Send me an email of the street and the limits, and we'll take a look at it and give you a response.
Okay, thanks.
Councilmember Emerson?
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. Dr. Peak, thank you for this report.
Sure.
And thank you for the work of your team this year. I know this was a difficult winter, and it's a learning curve. Every snow is different, and what you did last time may not work as well the next time. I was wondering, kind of as a follow-up to Councilwoman Hiller's questions, on the labor cost and the equipment cost both, is that over and above? Some of this is a sunk cost, right? These guys can't do anything else during those weeks. They can't patch potholes, can't do other things during these weeks when they're doing snow removal. That's why we do snow removal. It gives my guys something to do in weeks we wouldn't work otherwise. Is this over and above what they would have made anyway?
What I'd say is it's trying to capture that cost of service as opposed to, I think the material and the contract costs are direct expenses, right? That we're procuring that.
Sure.
Our labor you approve within the operating budget, so we make a plan of labor cost, and it is sunk cost. I'd say, staff is fixing potholes and other things during winter operations, because we have sometimes, and especially this winter, that we have to, once those roads are cleared, we've got potholes that we've got to get. But during the snow event, their time is 100% allocated to snow removal services. And so that's why we're, trying to distinguish those different cost centers. So it's budgeted. I think if that's where you're going, is that we are budgeting for labor cost and assuming that we do snow removal. What I'd tell you on the equipment side is, and that's why we've kind of put out in the CIP a fleet replacement fund, is our equipment does not have, to the level that it needs within operations, a plan to replace those vehicles. We're constrained by the motor fuel fund to replace our dump trucks, our plows and equipment, the primary things that do that. And that fund has a lot of demands on it. And we've talked about a vehicle equipment replacement program where we set money and budget and plan to, similar to our fire apparatus or police, that we regularly replace that equipment.
Thank you.
But we capture come back to your question, we capture the cost of that equipment using the FEMA billable rates for that equipment type.
Sure.
And one of the main reasons we do that, if we were in a disaster situation, and the governor declared a state of emergency and we're eligible for reimbursement funds, we charge that equipment time because we could receive reimbursement under disaster declaration for the cost of that equipment.
If I may just follow up. But just to be clear, and there's probably some increment like overtime or something in there, I'd imagine, or holiday pay. I know a lot of these events, it seemed like this year, every event happened on a Friday night to Sunday. It seemed like a lot of them did.
Right.
But just to be clear, though, if we didn't do this at all, we wouldn't save the total amount of money, because a lot of this is money that we paid out anyway in salaries and equipment.
Yeah, I think that's a fair statement. That salary piece is already budgeted. You're going to expend that because those people are here. But if we don't have to consume as much snow, ice, or use contract services, we don't spend that.
Thank you.
Councilmember Mays.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. Thanks, Jason. I know you and I have talked about this at length. I do appreciate the event-specific approach. I think that's a wise thing to do. Although I do think maybe perhaps do we need to get rid of the old policy at some point? I think the old policy had some flaws in it. One, the 6-inch requirement before doing residential streets. It seems silly to wait until there's 6 inches before you begin on things, and so that's part of my complaint. The other thing I was going to ask is, I know we had also discussed a number of potential changes with, perhaps partnering with the county, communicating better with the school districts. We've talked about maybe using pickups to spread de-icer rather than the large dump trucks, and a number of things. Could you kind of speak to some of that?
Absolutely. So what I'd tell you is we did meet with Kurt Niehaus, Public Works Director for Shawnee County, and have a working agreement to assist us on those kind of shared use roads. We did meet with the school district and have opened the line of communications, giving them contact information and work well with them. I know some of them, though, still choose to contact council members directly before contacting us, but we've made that effort to reach out to them and make sure that we're on the same page. With regards to the policy, one of the things we wanted to do was get this in front of you and just, we did the kind of survey back in December to assess the will of the body, and it just really didn't give us a consensus on what direction you want to go. So if the overall consensus is to continue with this approach, then we definitely would work to update that policy.
Thank you.
Councilmember Jensen.
Thank you. So just to make sure I understand the number correctly, so you need $800,000 to reimburse for costs we've spent on last year in next year's budget?
So what we're saying is that we think on average, the direct cost for buying de-icer, for contract services, we need a budget of $800,000 annually to be prepared. And so the way that would work is we work through a season. So we're kind of here in March, we would assess how much materials we consumed. We may go ahead and use some of that funding to stock up as we get into the fall of next year. Then that means we have to buy less during the heat of the events, but that budget number is what we think is a good target for the annual direct expenses of snow operations.
I'd still like to have some cost estimates on how much it costs to do more in the residential areas versus do less. That was one of the things we talked about, was that if people really want their streets plowed, there's a cost to that, but I don't have a good understanding for exactly what that is to communicate that with constituents as we go into budget season. I mean, if everybody really does want every street in the city plowed at 2 inches, we need to be able to give them a price tag and find out if they're willing to pay for it. Because if they are, that's fine. Obviously, we're going to have to raise taxes to cover that, but at the same time, what people are comfortable paying for and what they're not would be very helpful for us as we go into the budget.
Yeah, so that ballpark number, like I said, that's what we did. We got that data point. And so if you think about de-icing material and contract services, we spent $38,000 on residential streets. So multiply that by 10 events, you'd need an additional $380,000.
But that didn't plow every residential street.
that day, we only plowed residential streets.
But we didn't-
That $64,000 of cost was solely for residential.
That was every street in the city, every residential street in the city.
Yes.
Except for the one that Mr. Cohen mentioned.
We plowed every residential street.
They caught it on that.
Any more questions, comments? Councilmember Hiller.
I think that's a really good question that you asked, and that I didn't say that, but that's one of the reasons I brought this up, because if we're going to talk to the public about the true cost, this is the stripped down cost. It is not the total cost. That labor, if somebody's making $15 an hour, and when you add their benefits and then you adjust it for the time and for supervision and the prep at the season and all that, it's substantially, it would be at least twice. Well, we used to do that in my office, which was a nonprofit, and if it was just the counselors, their true cost was twice what the stripped down cost was. And when we had the back office people that were supporting the debt management plans and things like that, that was just what we had. It was triple, just because you don't see that back office, but you got to pay them to answer the phone, to manage all the back office on it as well. It's expensive. Thank you.
If you can, if
Yeah,
there is a different,
I'll work on a different
okay,
way
and get
of
it to
getting
us.
that information
Give it
to
to
you. Yes, sir.
That's great.
Yes, sir.
That's much less than I thought it would be, frankly.
Okay, let's continue to item 6C, if the clerk would read.
C is an update on the Topeka Fire Department station analysis.
Mr. City Manager.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. I've asked Deputy Chief Kelly Adams to come forward. Tonight, Deputy Chief is going to make a presentation related to the location of our next fire station, go through the analysis that's been done related to that particular need. Obviously, this was a need that was identified a while back by the governing body. Execution didn't happen. The funding is still available for that project. It's in the neighborhood of $5.7 million, which is listed on the back page of the cover sheet. It is a project that we have a couple of locations that we feel are good in the general area that's been identified. And so I'll let him go through the specifics and background.
Thank you, City Manager. Governing body, good evening. Thank you for allowing us to come and give our presentation on our station analysis tonight. Before I get started, I'd like to give a little background to this project because several of you weren't here. It goes back several years, just to refresh our memories. In 2006, the city and the department recognized that there were areas of the city that were experiencing extended response times. We began to plan, investigate, how can we address these issues? In 2010, the city received a donation of land on the southeast corner of Menninger campus for the purpose of housing a fire station. And in 2012, a project was approved by the governing body to put a fire station at that location. By 2013, we had completed the plans. The rendition is what you see on your screen tonight, and the groundbreaking actually took place, but the project never proceeded. So we're here tonight to talk to you about what we found is we were asked to go forward and look at our resources and make a recommendation to where we felt the best location for the station would be. So how did we begin that? We knew that there were several studies that had been done going back several years. Two of the most recent studies were included with your council packet this evening. The 2015 Center for Public Safety Management, the 2016 Emergency Services Consulting International, which is actually an update of the 2014 study that was done at Mr. Colson's request. I would like to point out that before we started our evaluation, we didn't really dive into these studies. We wanted to do our study and then come back and look at these to see what we found, if we were on the same base. When we did that, we found that there was similar coverage deficiencies noted in each of them. There were differing recommendations stated as well as how to address those deficiencies. So in our evaluation, to give you a little background on it, we decided to look at 5-minute drive time is how we looked at our coverage of the city of Topeka. We did this for a couple of reasons. First, it was a consistent way that we could show what our response would be from all of our current stations. And it was a consistent way to look at what our response would be from a proposed location. We can, even though we could see our response times now from our existing ones, we couldn't do that from a proposed location. So this gave us a consistent method to do that. And when we looked a little closer at it, we found that the 5-minute response time or drive time actually pretty much mirrored our response time. So we felt it was an accurate way to look at that. When we did that, and recognized the areas outside of this 5-minute drive time, we used the response times, property use, call volume, and benefits of different locations as we evaluated those. How we were able to do that was a collaboration between the city's IT team and the GIS department. What you have before you is one of the tools that was made in that collaboration. The IT was able to extract the fire department's data from its record management system and translate it into a form that the GIS department could use, put it in their system, and give us this type of tool that would let us look specifically at both the city and an area of the city to get the particulars of the call volumes, call types, things of that nature. Another product that it gave us was for GIS mapping. What you see here is a map of the 5-minute drive time from our current fire station locations. You're going to see on the 4 corners of the fringes of the city that there's areas that don't fall into that 5-minute drive time. That's nothing new to us. That's something that's happened since the beginning of the fire department. Since the time that we put our first fire station in the city has grown, and as we look, there's areas that need more coverage. We've had to add assets or redeploy assets to cover those needs. Just to give you a few examples of that, Station 8, down here in the lower left-hand side, in the early mid-'80s, I think it was 1985, that station was moved from 21st and Eveningside to 27th and Shunga to serve the growing south and west areas of the city. Later, in late 80s, around 1990, another engine company was added to that with personnel to continue to try to keep up with that demand that south and west was putting on that station. 1992, over on the east side, Station 2 was reopened, again with new resources to address the needs that were growing in the east side of town. And then later, 1996, Station 12 was built on the west side of town, again to address the needs of the south and west side, and resources from Station 8 were redeployed to that station to staff it. I'd like to direct you to one of the handouts, the current station locations that was with your packet tonight. That has a very colorful map, shows where we're currently located with all our stations and the areas that they serve. It's kind of an important thing as you look at that. Some of them are in the corners, different places, but the area that's indicated with that station is the call volume that we're going to talk about a little bit later on, particularly with the next handout that was in your packet, the station run total. That is referring to the calls within each one of those districts. That's not actually on an apparatus, that's the calls that were received in that district. So if you had one that was in your council district, you could see the actual calls in that district. And again, the second handout was for the apparatus themselves, or I'm sorry, the stations. So give you some idea of where our activity's at. So as we looked at all 4 of those corners and the things that we looked at earlier, the call volume, the call types, response times, we decided to focus our attentions on the northwest corner of the city. This is a little closer look at that area. It's a map of our
current response times using our 2018 data. The areas in gray, you should see 3 of them here. That indicates a 6 to 7 minute response time. The areas in green, lighter green, I'm sorry, should be about 4 of them, 5 right here, indicates a 7 to 8 minute response, and the darker green indicates an 8 to 9 minute response. So what do response times mean to us? Why is that important? NFPA response times ask for an initial arriving unit on scene within 4 minutes, 90% of the time. It asks for a full assignment to be on scene within 8 minutes, 90% of the time. Currently, citywide, the Topeka Fire Department provides an initial arriving unit on scene in about 6.5 minutes, 90% of the time. In that area that we identified in the northwest corner, the Topeka Fire Department puts an initial arriving unit on scene within 8 minutes, 90% of the time. So you can see that 8 minutes is above what we're doing citywide, and it's above and beyond what the NFPA standard calls for. One thing I would like to point out with that the response times, the 6.5 minutes, that is adding the calls for all of the calls that are outside of that 5-minute drive time. So anyone that's experiencing longer response times, that's added in there as well. So with that, when we looked at all of that, staff made the recommendation to place the new station at the area of 6th and Fairlawn. What this map is showing you is the 5-minute drive times from those locations. The areas in bright green would represent the 5-minute drive times from the proposed new location. A couple of things I'd like to point out about that is the area to the north along Highway 75 from 24 to Lower Silver Lake Road. That is current area that they cover that is still covered within that 5 time and then an industrial area. The area to the south is cutting into share calls with Engine 7 and Engine 8. They're 2 of the busiest companies in town. The last handout that I showed you, or I provided with you, is the apparatus run total. And it'll show you that Engine 7 ran over 3,700 calls last year. Engine 8 ran over 3,100 calls. So this location is going to help reduce the call load on those 2 companies alone. The area in dark green or olive green is the 5-minute drive time from the current locations that remain, and the area in salmon. And I would like to point out this is Highway 24 here, which is the northern border of the city. Anything below that is an area that's going to experience extended drive times by this proposal. It's going to be approximately 1 minute on the extension on the drive times. So what did we find the advantages of this to be? We felt like this was going to provide a more complete coverage of the city. When we looked at that as a whole, it provided the 5-minute drive time covered the city more completely. It better utilized the resources at Station 11. It decreased the call volume for Engine 7 and Engine 8, again, 2 of the busiest engines in town. TPD and TFD would then begin to utilize old Station 11 for resource staging, which would allow us to reduce the scheduled CIP remodel of Station 11 in 2020, and it would allow us to advance the scheduled renovations of other fire stations that are in need. It would also reduce or eliminate a CIP staging project for the Topeka Police Department. And it would provide better access to I-70, I-470, and Highway 75 for auto extrications and regional task force response. So once this was completed, where are we at? How do we move forward from there? We recognize that we still have areas outside of that 5-minute response time that still have a need that need to be looked at. We recognize that we still have Fire Station 14 in the CIP budget that hasn't been addressed yet. What we would propose to do with that is for us to finish our standard of cover, which is nearing completion, or if
you're not familiar, the standard of cover will take an in-depth look at our response times, our call volumes, our call types, which will allow us critical tasking to let us know what type of resources need to go to the calls that are being put out there. It looks at our land use, our future land use, demographics. Once this is completed, we take that information, we go before a diverse group of community members, provide that information to them, and let them have the focus group and decide, give us the feedback on how they want to see us move forward. That is what gives us the information we need to complete our community-driven 5-year strategic plan for the department. That both of those, the standard of cover and that community-driven strategic plan, are the first 2 steps of accreditation that we've been working on for Topeka Fire Department. So they're going to look at that. They're going to do the risk analysis for us. What are they willing to accept for service from Topeka Fire Department, and let us know. While we're doing that, we would anticipate working with outside agencies to develop auto aid agreements to cover those gaps until we make a decision and move forward. And with that, I would stand for any questions.
I'll start. Surprise. I'm really glad that you said you used your resources and you're here to present a recommendation. And I'm also glad that Topeka did its own study. I mean, Topeka is our study for us. It bothers me when there's studies done and they tell us what we need without asking you what we have and what we need. My question is, where do the firefighters stand on this? Were they included in this? Did you get the input from them?
No, this was mainly a information, data-driven decision. When we looked at those 4 corners of the city out there, the area in the northwest part of town had more calls, had greater call volume than all the other areas put together. When we had our evaluation done, we looked back, it was similar to what other people had recommended. We knew that, so we felt this initial one was something that just needed to be moved forward with. Going forward with Station 14, that's still in the budget, then that's where we would have a lot more input on that, and we feel that there's time to make that decision. We wouldn't be rushed to get that.
Because if I recall, when City Manager Colson was here, I thought they have another meeting that kind of come up with the same information.
This is a piece, similar to a piece of that plan. Their plan was to relocate resources to the 6th and Fairlawn area. They used the Fire Station 14 to put a new station up north and consolidate where Station 11 currently is. Station 1, combine a station up there for that. So we were working within the resources we had available, which was our current staffing, our current equipment, and that station. So we felt like this was a good first step. We can still adequately cover the area north of town.
So up in the Seaman area, and you might answer this, but I didn't catch it. Up in the Seaman area then, I don't know what street that is that goes, the really heavy traveled one.
35th Street?
40-something.
46.
Yeah. How long so if there's any accidents up there, who's going to cover that? And how long, did you say, another minute?
46th Street is covered by Soldier Township.
Okay, and
we have a small corner at 35th and Green Hills that was annexed some years back, which is the longest response time in North Topeka, and that's in that 7 to 8 minute range as well. When we map that out, that's 7 to 8 minutes from the current Fire Station 11. It's 7 to 8 minutes from the new location as well. So it's still in one of those extended response times. But again, we looked at that call volume and the risk. There was 7 calls there, I think, in the last 3 years.
So it's not going to get better, nor is it going to get worse?
That particular area would stay the same.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay, any questions? Councilmember Jensen?
Thank you. I guess I'm concerned about us only having one station north of the river. I realize we have bridges, but those can fail. And if there's a catastrophic event, those are bottlenecks. So can you speak to that, or has that been thought through in this study?
We didn't address that specifically, outside of the fact that we still have that thoroughfare coming from 6th and Fairlawn directly across Westgate Bridge back to North Topeka where we were.
Agreed, but if you don't have the bridges available, we're not properly planning for disaster.
Correct. That's a fair statement. We have one, if they're happen to be in the station, we would still have one station over there.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
Councilmember Emerson?
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. Deputy Chief, thank you for bringing this, and I do appreciate the work you guys did. My only issue representing District 4 is you cut off the thing at like 25th Street. I can't see anything as far as response times or anything else, and the same for Mr. Padilla, and I think Mr. Mays as well. We're kind of left in not knowing what this means for us. I don't know if it's possible to send us information with this showing the graph.
Absolutely. Anybody like that, I'd be happy to get it for you. We cut this off at 25th Street because that's where the change occurred. Nothing below that change. Currently, we were just focusing on that northwest corner. With the analytic tools that the GIS department has given us, we can actually show the response times and calls in your district, each council district, if you'd like.
That would be fantastic, yeah, because even the current response times,
Right.
that map doesn't even show, so I don't.
Right, that's just for that one specific area is all we were focusing on, but we do have the ability to do that, and we'd be happy to get those.
That'd be great, I appreciate it, thank you.
Certainly.
Councilmember Hiller?
A couple things. One, that bridge thing came up before. The issue is we have partnerships. We help out the townships that are nearby on a regular basis and others. And similarly, if there were a disaster, very unlikely that all of our bridges would be out anyway. But if there were, then those partners, are there for us. And we have to, I think the department keeps those in mind when we
Absolutely.
when we plan. And similarly, I sure hope we can fully address the Station 14, so we can just put that, if you've got a partnership worked out. I understand when I missed the JADO meeting, that discussion about the station was a little awkward, but, if we're really not planning, if we've already seen that we don't need to do 14, I think it would be good for us to settle that. I'll just throw that out. That's not the subject of today. But back to the fundamentals and so on that are in this report, I'm a little troubled. The CPSM report, when it came out, really, I read it all the way through then, and I have not had time to reread it, but I will, I promise. As well as the other one, which I've been through in the past. But what it did was said, you don't start with sort of the old school, just how fast can we get to a place, but if you're doing master planning, what you do is you step back and say, what are the risks? What is it we're about? Are we about just saving lives and saving property in the case of fires? Are we considering EMS as well? And then you look at the data, like how many fires there have been, how many people were hurt or died, and would that response time have made a difference? We didn't really, I think in one of the studies, you can finally find the data on how many fires we actually had. But an apparatus run and a station run doesn't tell you how many fires there were. It also the data about how many people we lost for whom a minute or two would have made a difference. And what that study did, so I think it was worth reading them both first instead of later, was to say back up, look at what your needs are, because they've changed so much, really, over time. Fire calls are down, particularly when you get into the perimeter of the city, and correct me if I'm wrong, the properties are farther apart, they were built to code at the time, their standards are such that it's very unusual to get a full raging fire anyway, and the smoke alarms were built in and so on. So we check all that data, but that affects how many fire calls you're going to have. That affects an assessment of what response time is adequate for this community, because you guys do a wonderful job with your 6.2-minute average, for instance. It seems we don't have fatalities, we get fires put out promptly and so on. So I guess I'm hoping that with this master planning that we're doing, we're not just putting together something and asking the public to say, yeah, they think it's a great idea, but instead we're backing up and we're really looking at what risks we have, what problems we're trying to solve too. Part of what that report puts out as well is that then if your issue is you're wanting to save lives and save property, then there's at least, especially today, as much prevention work that needs to be done as adding suppression activity. And so if you're preventing somebody's house from catching on fire or them from being hurt, that's where you need to put your effort, both in terms of educating the public, getting smoke detectors out, and actually working on the fire plans themselves, making sure that the document review is done by seasoned firefighters. That's what I read in that plan. And what I'm hearing is that we're just going back to the old way we did things. And I would really like to see that assessment of what our needs are and to see station locations, station numbers based on that.
And we can do that. I'm going to start a little bit backwards.
Okay.
In that plan, to be real honest, we hadn't seen that 2015 plan until a couple of weeks ago. That was the first time I had taken a look at it. So it was very interesting. I was very enthralled in it. I talked to Mr. Gerber about it. I'm kind of a geek that way as to what we were doing. I really got into it. But one thing that it says when you get at the end of it, the deployment of your resources is based on two things: your response times and your demand for service. That's the short answer. Now, the longer answer of that is, I could stand here for several minutes or longer and talk to you about, what got me so excited about that report is that was done 5 years ago, 6 years ago. It was put out in August of 2015. There was a number of recommendations made throughout that of the department should start doing this, it should focus on this, different things. I can tell you, I went through that last night and again this morning, and with the exception of two things, we've began all of those. Everything that was recommended in that report, without us seeing it, has been started in some fashion. They're in different stages. Risk analysis, prevention's working on developing risk scores. They've started putting them into our record management system so that we can use that, excuse me, for dispatching and critical tasking. The cooperation with the Emergency Communications Center and priority dispatching, that's in motion, that's in play right now. I could just go on and on about every bit of that. And to make it short, though, what it boils down to is when Chief Duke come to us and we decided to go toward accreditation, those are all pieces of accreditation. That's what that standard of coverage does for you. It's not just response times, it's a complete risk analysis of your community. I hope to have that to be able to come before you this summer sometime before we do the community focus group. So those pieces are being looked at for the future. That's why we didn't make a recommendation of put 14 here or do something like that. We felt that demand for service is lower in those areas. To the south, for example, I think there was only 50 calls for service last year.
Right.
We still have a responsibility to respond to that area, but is it worth a fire station right at this time? The same for the southeast, southwest, north. I think I mentioned we had 7 calls up there. So that's what we're going to draw on the community, members of the department, everybody to come. What do you expect from us? What are you willing to spend your money on? Are you happy with that response time? Do you want to pay for that station out there? That's what'll come out of that. We felt that this recommendation, though, the call volume in that small area that you've seen was around 650 calls last year alone. In that area, we've got 2 nursing homes, we've got several hotels, we have apartments, we have doctor's offices out there. We have a lot of single-family homes right in there too, which everybody has, but we had a lot of high occupancy, high-risk buildings in that with a high call volume, and we felt that that was just a natural fit, that it didn't really take a lot of discussion to put that there.
But if I may, the call volume was not for fires. Correct?
No, they weren't all fires. That's fire and EMS. I will say that 650 calls was emergency. That's another thing that report asked you to do, was separate out your emergent versus non-emergent calls. We run a lot of falls that we run non-emergent, calls such as putting in smoke detectors are run non-emergent. Those weren't counted in these statistics. It was all light and siren calls. But I didn't separate them out for you. I can do that. Fires aren't always the greatest risk, but they're still a risk.
Well, I just wanted to make that point. I've tried to before, but we're at a point where to do master planning with all the things that have changed, to me, it should be as if, let's say we didn't even have a fire department. If we were going to start from scratch, when you start from risk and then you say what services are needed, then it lets you question and perhaps even regroup all the different things that you do, whether it's, do we really need EMS, or is that something AMR could handle? You look at whether anybody else does it. Nobody else fights fires, although we have partners around the perimeter of the city. But you say, what about EMS? What about ALS? How much should we be doing in prevention? How much related to that in education training? I mean, you've got some subdivisions now, but you look at that, and if you're reproportioning what you're doing, some of those things don't take any footprint at all to speak of, but then you get back to the discussions that we had, like of vehicles and what you would use. I think that study named even like King County, like Seattle, I want to say, that's doing some ALS, but they do it with like 2 SUVs. They don't need a whole bunch of fire stations to provide those services. And so to just say we need lots and lots, like we always have had, without master planning the whole service delivery, seems premature to just pick out one thing at a time.
Okay.
Thank you.
All right, Councilmember Ortiz.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. I don't know where I'll start, but I'll try to figure these little chicken scratches out here. I just want to say to my colleagues, we do need Station 14. You heard this man's response time. You heard what it's supposed to be. It's supposed to be 4 minutes and not 8 minutes. And we've been very lucky. I'll sit here and say that again and again. We've been very lucky. I can't help it, we don't have fires every 10, 15 minutes, but we've been very lucky with the lives that we have saved and the fires that we've had. I would thank my brothers, the FOP, or the firefighters. I would thank them constantly because they do a great job with limited things. I'm kind of disappointed. When we got that proposal that to renovate City Hall, I'll go there, because people needed new chairs, new desks, and all of this. So we heard from them. We actually heard from the city employees of what they needed. But you just said we didn't even meet with the firefighters. These are the people that are out there on the trucks. These are the people that do this job better than I can sit here and say, but I've rode with them time and time again. I've studied this time and time again. That's how I know a lot of this. And we haven't even included them. And I don't understand that. I don't understand that. When are we going to sit down at the table and invite the professionals, the community, when are we going to do that? When are we going to engage that so we can all move forward? Because they know better than I know. They know better than all of us know about the response times and what's needed. And when I constantly hear from them, we do need fire station number 14, that yes, we have township, we don't have anything in writing, and yes, we have partners, we don't have anything in writing. It's a mutual agreement. They don't bring the same resources that we bring. That means they're totally different from what we bring to the scene. And so, but there are partners. I would love to see that in writing, because I've been on here 15 years, and from the night that I got sworn in, we opened up station number 3, because they said we didn't need it. But my friend's daughter died in East Topeka, and I said, if I get on that council, we're opening that station, because it takes the same time to get from 2 to Hancock there. They couldn't make it, and that's why Fire Station 2 was built, because that little girl, the response time, and she burned up in a fire. It was terrible. I hope we never have to experience anything like that. In North Topeka, we had 2 fires. I would like to know the response times on that. We had 2 recent fires that would be directly impacted by this study if we implement it. We've had bridges closed where they had to go over there. We've had them to stay over there. We've had to relocate. It's one of these times it's going to hit us. We can't even get people to take smoke detectors up here, right here. My colleagues, I've asked each and every one. You did.
I got it.
I begged you to get your smoke detectors. Padilla's mom said thank you when we came to Oakland, and I'm grateful. You guys might not take me serious, but that's to help our fire department, because we are missing in so many. So I guess it's how you want to read the report, and I guess it's what report you read. That's best, but I want us all to sit down so that we are all on one accord, and that we understand where we're going, how we're going with the firefighters. I think we owe them that. Just like we owe the city employees to listen to them and the chairs and stuff that they wanted. Some of it, yeah, they can't have. I understand that. Some of it they need. But our response time, I looked at a big book one time that was bought here in 2005, and it was terrible of our response time. And when I explained those response times to some of the council members, we did open up Station 3. There's a lot of fire stations that are in bad shape. They're in terrible shape. Mr. Haynes sat right there where Mr. Padilla sat in his seat, and he would vote against the firefighters because we don't need that. Nah, we don't need that. No, we're not going to do that. Guess what? His grandson took a lighter, lit his sweater on fire. His house caught on fire, and the next meeting he came back and said, I was amazed how soon they got there, how soon they put it out. Yeah, every call's not going to be a fire call, but this is what our guys do. They do AMR, they do all of that. So I hope we would take a good look at this, because it's important to me that they have the tools, that half the tools we don't give them, because inside the firefighters' quarters, and if you haven't been in there, go in there, go sit in those chairs, go see what they work with. We don't give them half the tools that they need, and we should be providing that. But we have to look at the areas. I know the study I'm looking at, it said the first fire station we need is at 6th and Fairlawn, that area. And that's why we chose that. It was our fault that we didn't follow through with that. And then the next one they said was in Oakland. They said we need to move that station further east. But then the next fire station came back and said, well, it's not really growing out that way. We could probably get by with that. I get that. I get that. When we looked at stations in the South, I had the Metropolitan tell me if they got an airplane on fire, that's first dibs right there. But they're our partners. Not that house, First Dibs Township. That's their, I had them told me that their coverage, that's First Dibs. Not what we've asked them to do. I hope it doesn't hit home, and I pray to God that we don't have something very, very serious, that it would be on all of ours, because I cringe every time I think about District 9 and that we didn't go forward with that fire station. I cringe at that area that's growing, that's totally growing, and the businesses out there. So I would hope, going forward, we could get with them, the firefighters, and make them a part of this, hear what they got to say, and I look forward to looking for that report. And the report that came out that sat on Colson's desk forever, I'd like to see that again. I know I have it, but
That's the one.
That's the one. It sat on Colson's desk. We asked him to move it, and he wouldn't. Because he had this little tort going with our firefighters, so he would. There you go. There you go.
Timing's everything.
Timing is everything. Thank you, guys.
Councilmember Mays.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. Something that jumps off the page at me is a station run total here that Fire Station 7 is doing more than 5 times the calls as Station 11. And something that concerns me about that is that station is located at 12th and Oakley, and we are about to go through a huge 3-year project on 12th Street. And we're going to take that down to 1 lane, potentially. What I would perhaps like to see on this is maybe, the chart is really nice, but I would like to see maybe what this looks like after these changes would be implemented. Perhaps, because I know you had said that if Station 13 is built, that would take some of the load off of 7 and 8. I'd be interested to see how much of the load that would take off, and how this might be redistributed based on your call volumes. And I'd like to maybe hear a little bit about, have plans been made to deal with that road construction on 12th Street? Because that's going to potentially shut down your westbound route out of that station. So, could you speak to that?
That is one of their main thoroughfares coming out of Station 7. We are included in the street maintenance meetings that go on that talk about the ongoing projects and upcoming projects. So they do address those issues. I can't tell you what that particular plan is for that. That's not where I go, but they are aware of it, and it has been addressed, yes, sir.
Okay, thank you.
Councilmember Jensen?
So, a couple of questions, if you could bring some data back, and then a comment. I live next to Station 7. They're fine folks. It's not a ridiculous distance to 17th Street, which could go west. So it's not ideal, obviously, but you can get right down Oakley onto 17th Street pretty easily while it's closed. So I don't know if that's your official plan, but the idea is that 17th and 12th wouldn't be closed at the same point at the same time, is my understanding. Now, again, I'm not a firefighter, and they'll have to work that up the streets, but a cursory glance would indicate that's an option. I would be interested in the run times, if they could include mutual aid. And then, so from the time it takes to actually get a qualified person on scene, how long is that in the outlying areas? And then the other thing I would be interested in, I'm a disaster recovery planner, and so I want the worst case scenario. So given the proposed layout, what's the maximum number of incidences we can handle in a given area? Particularly interested in above the river and below the river, given you can't get across the river. We had a simple fire take out a multi-million-dollar bridge for months. So it's not necessarily a huge natural disaster, but imagine even a real severe windstorm. It's not so much that the entire city is destroyed, it's that we have lots of calls citywide for service, and now suddenly we don't have the capacity to handle one major issue. If we have a bunch of calls north of the river, it's feasible to assume that all of our mutual aid partners would also have a bunch of calls north of the river, and we only have one station to address that if those resources are busy. Now, I could be wrong, and those resources may be able to handle 2 or 3 calls, the same as our team can, but I think we need to know that, and we need to know what's the worst possible scenario that could possibly happen to our city, and if it's not an acceptable risk to be prepared for, then to what level are we going to be prepared for? I mean, obviously, if a massive tornado comes through and levels the entire thing, like what happened in Joplin, Missouri, we're probably not realistically going to be able to prepare for that. But what are we prepared for? At what level? And if we're not, we need to go back to our constituents and ask them, for your family's sake, what level are you prepared to pay for? So ultimately, it's our constituents that have to agree that they have to agree to accept a certain risk at a certain price. That's just the nature of living in a society. So I think it'd be an interesting conversation to have with that, and some of that data would help lead that conversation. And we may find that we have everything we need. I don't know. I just think with all the, I mean, this is wonderful information. I'm incredibly thrilled that you guys have taken such a data-driven approach. I just would like to extract a couple of extra data points and see, given worst-case scenario, how this would lay out.
We'll do our best.
I appreciate it. Thank you.
Okay, you had said, correct me if I'm wrong, calls from 11, where am I? 631 calls would go to 7?
No, that is not
Okay, where
correct.
will they go?
That 631 calls are what, if you go back to that map.
Well,
that
see, we
you-
don't have some of the things you showed.
Colorful, the station map like this
Yep,
here?
got it.
Okay. If you look at that, I need the chief, he's good at naming colors for me. Where you see Station 11.
Right.
That area up there. Within that boundary, there were 631 calls for
Okay.
service last year. That's what that's telling you.
Okay, but-
Those calls are still going to be there. They're just going to be responded to from either Fire Station Number 1 or the new location at 6th and Fairlawn.
So 6th and Fairlawn is like up above number 7 a
It
little?
would be straight above and just a little bit to the left, yes.
To the west?
You see 75 coming in.
Yeah. And about on
yes.
the border of those two colors, approximately.
Okay, so this wouldn't be there. It would be divided between those two. Okay, and that's my question. I'll think on that for a minute. Councilmember Ortiz?
Thank you. I just want to say to Councilman Mays, stop in your fire stations. Stop in a couple of them. It's amazing. They have boards up and they got every street that's closed, everything. They keep up with that. They do a good job of that, the detours and everything. Who's fallen out of their house, who's, this is a medical person, they communicate very, very well. And I'm grateful for that because when they're pulled, just like we had that spill on I-70, and look at all of the people that had to be there. So there was a lot of places that were not covered. And I would like to know that, like, who was there that left their area unmanned when we had the big wreck on I-70?
Yeah, that was Station 3, Station 8, Station 5, was 5 there?
And was 2 there?
2.
All of them were there at some point.
Yeah, they rotated through.
That's the point I'm getting at. All of them were there at some point.
That's correct. When a major event like that happens, it takes out more resources than
Right.
we're normally used to having committed at one time. Our chiefs will sit around. We have a map very similar to this that shows where our companies are currently located that are
Right.
in service. And he will ask Station 7, for example, to go to Station 3 to stand by to equal that coverage out. So we're still covering the city as
Right.
equally as we can.
As
It's not
equally.
as good,
Right.
but it's spreading it out to where we have the same coverage throughout the city, as long as we can do that.
Right. Thank you, Chief.
I thought on it. Okay, so all the calls for 7, you said 3,762, right? You're going to split that in half between 7 and 13. Well, whatever, you know.
12.
What?
Oh, yes, we do.
Yeah, the new proposed.
Yeah.
And if I may, I think you might be looking at the wrong sheet. Look at the one that says station run total at the top.
Yeah.
Okay,
Okay.
3,421.
Those numbers are a little bit different. And just to explain that briefly, the reason for that, these are calls for service in that territory. Those, Engine 7 runs out of that territory. That's why that number's higher as far as their run totals. So they may not have participated in all of these if they were out doing something else.
Okay.
But they go into other territories. So if you look at the station run total, Station 11 was 631 calls. Station 7 was 3,421 calls for service.
So if you knock out 11, 7 can't take any of those calls, but 7's calls are going to 13, and then 11's calls, 641 of them are, you know, they're about split between 1 and 13. Aren't you overloading 13 already?
I don't believe so. I don't have a way to predict that. They're only going to take a portion of Station 7's calls. They're not taking that 3,421. They're going to take just a few areas of that. They're going to take a few areas. We would have to redistrict the run cards, if you will, or how companies respond to each one of those areas if we was to move this station here. So they would still respond to a portion of that 631, and they would respond to a portion of that Station 7, the 3,421. It would bring them up a little bit more in comparison to what the other stations do, is
Yeah, I'll
what
think
we
on
were
that.
looking at.
Okay. Anywhere else?
Yeah. I don't have the data in front of us to accurately show that, but just for example, even if you take the numbers that are on these sheets, Engine 7, in Station's territory, they had 3,421 calls for service. Station 7 ran 3,762 calls for service. So I do have other graphs that show they were unavailable for calls within their territory approximately 1,500 times last year. So if your house was one of those 1,500 calls, you would have waited on a company from Station 4, Station 8, somebody to come there. In this case, it would possibly be Station 13, depending on where you're at. But the reliability, and that is something else that's looked at in the standard to cover of how often that company's out of service, and we have to have another company come in to cover those calls. So that next data set is a lot more detailed than this was. But as we move forward, we'll have that information.
Thank you, yes, if you can get all the information, and we'll get a bunch more questions, and then and we'll ask you about those. But thank you very much. And we'll move on now to announcements. No, we won't. City manager.
The one item I wanted to mention was, it was mentioned about the mutual aid agreement not being in writing. We do have a mutual aid agreement in writing with the National Guard. So that has been accomplished at this point.
National Guard?
Yes.
Okay, well, I'm talking about, if I may, I would like to see that. I'd like to see, but we don't have township. I'd like to see all that we have in writing. That would be great. Thank you.
Now we go to announcements. Mr. City Manager.
Thank you, Mayor. I just have two that I want to comment on tonight. While we're on the topic of fire, the Topeka Fire Department did have their graduation. They graduated 19 from their Fire Citizens Academy, so it was a very successful event for the fire department. Oh, sorry. Thank you. Yes, we had 19 graduate from the Citizens Academy for the fire department. Exciting to see that happen. The next thing I wanted to comment on is just we've been dealing with the additional amount of rain that we've had. Just kind of giving kudos for things that have happened in the past related to work that was approved over time We're seeing, obviously, that we've been able to handle this amount of water related to our stormwater systems. The changes that were done with Shunga, the changes that have been done, obviously, the river many years ago in other locations, we continue to see the improvements that we're making in our storm sewer system are paying off to be able to handle the amount of rain that we have. And that is something that can't be taken lightly. It's an investment, a big investment that our community's made and continues to make. And so far, it's paying off for us. Obviously, that doesn't mean that we can take a Noah's Ark rainfall, but, it is something that we're able to handle much better than our community used to be able to in the past.
Great. City Clerk, would you like to read the preliminary agenda?
There will not be one.
Okay, well, then I was right, just to skip right over that. Okay, Councilmember Ortiz.
Thank you. I just want to say congrats to all the graduates. There was a lot of graduations, a lot of graduation parties, and I just wanted to say congratulations to all of those, even those Scots.
Thank you. Councilmember Emerson.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. Last night, the Rolling Meadows Neighborhood Association hosted the Strengthening Police and Community Partnerships program, and it was well attended, and the chief was there and several of his, a major and some lieutenants, and Officer Bracken. It was very worthwhile, and I appreciate the efforts of the Topeka Police Department to reach out to the community. It was a great program, and next coming to District 5.
Councilmember Padilla? Councilmember Jensen?
There are 2 national holidays this weekend I want to remind everybody about. One of them is my birthday. And the day following is Memorial Day. I just wanted to send a special thank you to all the families that lost someone serving our country. Your sacrifice is duly noted and very appreciated. Have a good weekend, everybody, and remember the reason for Monday. Thank you.
Councilmember Cohen? Councilmember Hiller?
Just a quick recap. I think people know I'm proud, happy, and tired. We've had 11 days of recognition of the Brown v. Board 65th anniversary. I'm happy to tell you we had 24 events over that period of time, had over 50 volunteers, and by my rough count had over 2,500 people participating. It was a very, very diverse group. We started with the plaintiffs at the beginning, and they had some wonderful events, or we did at first, but kind of to my surprise, in a way, I wasn't sure how the diversity and mix would sustain over the 11 days. We had 65 people at the Real Talk Next Steps Symposium just this past Friday, and it was a very, very diverse crowd, even yet again. With Ruben West from Topeka as our featured keynoter. We were able to give recognition to the Brown Foundation and Cheryl Brown Henderson at their banquet on Friday night. They had the biggest crowd I've ever seen at their event. It was really a great event, and it was nice to honor them after 30 years of service to the community and all the things that they've done. I'll have more later, but there were certainly a lot of initiative and a lot of ideas for carrying forward the agenda of Brown and some community-wide initiatives. So thanks to everybody who supported it and participated, and I thought you'd want to know. Thanks.
Okay, Dr. Peak, I am looking out for the roads for you, because we had road surfacing over in Oakland today and right by my house, and I was right at my gate making sure they did not miss any spots. And that was kind of mesmerizing watching them. It's kind of relaxing watching them fill in the holes. Anyway, I was helping you. And then another item, we had a car accident. We have quite a few car accidents at this corner. And I was watching, so the fire department came out, and I saw them do their medical, back off. And the police came out, and I saw them do it just ran like clockwork on what everybody's little job was. As long as I moved out of the way, I was standing there helping them too, but I'm sure they appreciated that. Okay, and then I wanted to say about Carry the Load is a nonprofit dedicated to providing active, meaningful ways to honor and celebrate the sacrifices made by our heroes, which is military, veterans, and first responders. They were founded in 2011 by 2 Navy SEALs, veteran Navy SEALs, and they began a 20-hour, 11-minute memorial march in Dallas. And then in 2012, they expanded to the East Coast, walking from West Point, New York to Dallas. And then, so every 5 miles, they carry American flag. The relay captain carries the American flag to bring awareness to the sacrifices of the heroes. In 2016, they expanded to the West Coast, so they went Seattle to Dallas. And this year, they are adding the Midwest, and they're coming to Topeka. They're coming through Topeka. So every year, the participation has grown. In 2018, they walked through 19 states and had rallies in 50 cities. So the marchers on Thursday, this Thursday coming up, will arrive at the Topeka Fire Station number 2 on Rice Road at 2:30. They're going to walk to the Topeka Public Library at 6, get there at 6, Dollar Tree on Wanamaker, they'll get there at 8, and they'll finish at Mission Township Fire Station 31 on Urish. You can join anytime you want, walk as far as you want. I'm going to start. I'm not going to finish. I can already know that. I'm going to start. I'm going to bow out when I can't walk anymore. But if you want to join that, you're welcome. I think it's going to be a little emotional. And thank you in advance for participating. And seeing nothing else before the council. Oh, I'm sorry. I have you down. I was just so excited here. Actually, there's 2 people, and the first person is Princess Anthony. Not here. Second.
King Henry.
Henry McClure.
Henry McClure, good evening. I think it's time to dust off the Washburn Lane Parkway plan. Joan Wagner, who's a really delightful woman, launched her whole political career in Topeka, became mayor on that plan. And I think if there's one thing worse than having a study done, that maybe might feel unnecessary, is to have a really good study done and then not do anything about it. Joan appointed me to the Planning Commission, and that's sure a thankless job. But part of when I was a planning commissioner, we had this beautiful plan come forward called the Visual Preference Survey. And I think we spent like $60,000 to $90,000 on this plan. And if we would have followed that plan back then, the Boyle signs wouldn't be here. So go back to 2003, 2004, those signs, they would have been eradicated at that moment. And part of her Washburn Lane Parkway plan was renovating the area, in the College Hill, which is now the TIF district. But what's the most important thing is we can't lose focus on how important the area between Stormont Vale and Washburn College is. Okay? We can't lose focus on that no matter where we're looking. Those are the most crucial areas in our hometown. There's nothing more important than educating children and then keeping our community alive. I'd like to thank the city manager. Thank you so much for giving me a moment of your time and just telling me, hey, you know what, the development agreement didn't get recorded. Well, so let's record it now. So going forward, if the guy sells it tomorrow, the development agreement's in place, okay? Now, as a real estate developer, and if you're trying to make a living developing real estate in this community, one of the first things you have to do is go meet with the planning department. And I'm not the only one that will say sometimes it seems like they'll open up a plan and try to figure out, well, we can't do that where it doesn't fit in the plan. And as we go through the TIF district again for downtown, apparently, I know we have another TIF district. Well, think of the monumental planning that goes behind a TIF district. And this is the one thing that still I'm dumbfounded about, is how would you ever, and over the years, I've been a pretty good salesman on stuff. I mean, College Hill sits there due to my salesmanship today. But I don't know how I could go to the planning department and ever get a BART park approved between standing behind the TIF district. So my goal today is to create enough awareness about the unnecessary BART park and how important the existing TIF district is and and the economic development in that area. So there's a short fuse time frame that their zoning will expire. It was only a 3-year permit. So between now and that expiration, you guys might see me from time to time, but I want to keep creating public awareness because it's never too late to do the right thing. And so I want to invite you guys down to that area. I mean, we're dodging bullets down in that area, if you think about it. And we can't give up on what we've started. And I'm trying to figure out how to sell you guys on doing the right thing and going about taking care of our community. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. McClure. Now, seeing no business before the council, we're adjourned.